Okay.
I don't blame you. I tried to.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it's good to see you. And we're just 1 minute before the hour, but we'll start anyway, because I'm really glad that you're here early, and I appreciate that a lot. So let's open in prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so mindful of you and your word and the truthfulness of it. Help us today to understand things which might not be that easy to grasp. Today we're looking at some deeper concepts than we have in the last couple of weeks. Help us, Lord. Open the eyes of our understanding. Help me to speak your truth. And we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, well, I don't know how you guys are feeling, but I find the events of this past week disturbing. I'm talking about Israel. I'm talking about Hamas and all that. I find that very disturbing. When I started planning this course, it was sort of like an academic type thing. Okay, let's just talk about, the end of days. But now I'm seeing it in a different light. I don't want to be one of those guys that are saying, okay, this is it or that is it. But I'm seeing, oh my goodness, this is a trend that I'm seeing. Anyway, we'll talk about that. So, this is our opening slide. That doesn't work. Come on, you can do it. Maybe I turned it off. No, I don't think I did. Come on. Well.
Should I go get Cindy in the office?
Okay, so might have to do it the old-fashioned way with my little finger, as opposed to this newfangled way, which uses my other finger remotely. And I introduced this book a while back. It's R.C. Sproul, excellent Reformed theologian. I mean, I agree with almost all of the things that he writes, and if I agree with it, therefore it's got to be right. Okay. The Last Days According to Jesus, and it's available on Amazon if you wish. You don't need it. And I suspect they're going to get a copy in the library anyway. Well, today, our topic is This Generation, the End of the Age. And what does that mean when Jesus said this generation and the end of the age? But I wanted to do a little review first. As a teacher of over 50 years, I find it's always good to just pause and go back a little bit and do a quick review. So I'm going to ask you questions, and I would like you to help me. So here's the first question. 33 A.D., what is the significance of that?
Crucifixion and resurrection.
Okay, that was what?
Crucifixion and resurrection.
Absolutely right. Now, for extra credit, can you tell me the day of the crucifixion? And for extra credit, can you tell me in ancient Babylonian what it was? We talked about that. It's like a car. Think a car. Nisan 14. Nisan. Yeah. The months of the Jewish calendar, they got that when they were in the Babylonian captivity. So isn't this cool? We get to speak a little ancient Babylonian. I think it's cool. Okay. Another date. 66. What was 66? And why is it important?
The start of the Roman-Jewish War.
Exactly. You're doing your homework. Excellent. That's right. 66 was the start of the 4-year war. It ended in 7, but it started in 66. Okay? And things have never been good over there. 68. What's the value? What's the significance of 68 A.D.?
Nero died.
Nero died. Yes, he did. Now, Nero was not a nice guy at all. And the emperors, really, they weren't nice people either. But when he died, there was a power vacuum. And that power vacuum was filled by 2 other short-term emperors who didn't last long at all. One was Otto, and the other one was Galba. We don't hardly even know about them because they lasted 6 months before they were killed. But this is a power vacuum, and the general who's in charge of the besieging of Jerusalem, he's called back. and they want him to become the emperor, which is not a job with good benefits, you know, if you're dying off so quickly. But anyway, his name was Vespasian, and he goes back to Rome to become the emperor. Now he lasts a while, but what are you going to do about your invasion of Jerusalem? Well, he turns it over to his son, and his son's name was Titus. His son's name was Titus. Okay, so 69. 69 is what happens in 69. Now we know in 68 there was a change of leadership, and 69 though, what goes on here? Now it's kind of late in 69 too. This is the beginning of the official siege. Okay, now a siege is a very terrible thing, because that means you are not letting anything in or out. You're shutting off food, water, all the rest. Now, Jerusalem actually had its own water supply, so they were able to hang out, but the food was another issue. So the siege begins in 69. And finally, it ends in 70, about August of 70. Now, 70 AD is really, ultra really significant, because it's the destruction of the temple. And when that was destroyed, what does that do to the entire Jewish, system of worship? No temple, no more Jewish system. Very significant. And of course, it's not been rebuilt. And what does Paul say is the temple now? Yeah, we are the temple. Yeah, we're the temple. That's pretty neat. Okay, we talked about, what happened there? We talked about various proofs. You see, Christians have been criticized relentlessly and often unfairly. And you want to send your kid off to the university? Well, they're in for a battle. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I described my own personal battle, going to a Catholic university, from a Catholic high school, from Catholic grade school, and I ended up in there, and I'm getting beat up by the professors. And I'm walking around saying, what in the world do I believe? What do I know? It's a challenge. It's a challenge. So, how would you argue that there even was a Jesus? Because, you see, that's what they say. There was no Jesus. What are you talking about? No Jesus. No Jesus. How would you argue that there was? What kind of proof can you give them? Well, one of the proofs, of course, is my friend here, Josephus. I love this guy. And he's an amazing historian. He has the history of the Jewish people from the creation of the world all the way through the fall of Masada, all the way through. And in detail, I mean, how in the world, people in there, never heard of. What comes across, though, with Josephus is the pettiness and the infighting and all the stuff that goes on with that. But anyway, so how is Josephus going to be proof that there was a real Jesus? Well, Josephus is not a Christian. So he's not and it always helps when the other side gives you some proof. He's not a Christian. But he quotes, and I read that way back when. Okay, so there's a passage talking about Jesus crucified under Pontius Pilate, and as a matter of fact, he credits the resurrection of Nisan 16, and that's April the 5th in the year 33. Very important stuff. Okay, so we argue that there's a proof of Jesus from historical writings, and he's not the only one. We got Suetonius. He's a Roman historian. And of course, this is Pliny the Younger. That's all we got of him. Pliny the Younger. This one here is Tacitus. And finally, we have our friend Josephus himself. So we have at least 4 historical references in the pagan literature that there is a real Jesus. Okay? That's pretty neat. Now, but then they go on and say, yeah, but there's no proof in inscriptions. There's no place else where we would know that there's a Jesus. Now, this is the one I like. Maybe you're familiar with this. We talked about this. Does anybody remember who this is and what this is? This is a strange thing. Let me help you understand what we're looking at here. Off to the left, we see a kid, a young guy, raises his hand in salute. It looks almost like obscene, but it's a Roman salute. And he's saluting on a cross a figure with a donkey's head. Okay? And the donkey is often used in these caricatures to represent the Jews. And it says there in Greek, Alexamenos worships his God. Alexamenos worships his God. Now, this was scribbled into the plaster of the dormitory of the pages of the Caligula palace. So it was done in mockery, right? They were mocking Alexamenos, and they were mocking his God. But notice it's a proof that there was this God that's being mocked on the cross. Okay, so that's that. Any questions about Alexamenos? It's a little hard to understand at first, but it is graffiti. You know, they scratched it into the plaster. Okay.
So there must have been pages or understudies that must have had a Christian group.
Well, yeah. What strikes me about this is that Alexamenos was vocal enough or out there enough that the other pages made fun of him. You see, they're making fun of Alexamenos. But that means he's worshiping. Now, in addition to that, though, there's another inscription that reads, Alexamenos is faithful. And that was another piece of plaster. Now, so they were noticing this guy's faith. Okay? Very good. He knows his faith. All right. Anything about Alexamenos? I find archaeology and all this fascinating. This is fascinating stuff that we can, look at this and say, okay, here's some proof. Now, at that time, this was in the year about 40 AD. 40 AD. And Jesus died in 33, 7 years later. But 7 years after the crucifixion, the faith is now in Rome in the emperor's palace. See what I'm saying? Right there in the boys' club, boys' school. Yeah. Yes.
Nothing, I was just kind
Oh, okay. That's fine.
I had an answer, but I couldn't quite drag it up.
Okay. So that impresses me. 7 years and the faith spreading. Pretty cool. Okay. Anything you want to add about this or anything to say? Okay. We're talking about a thing called eschatology. And, you got to use big words for these concepts. Big words. What is eschatology? What does it translate? Study of final things, actually. And it has two aspects. Our final things and the final things about the world, okay? But there's two main viewpoints. And this divides the understanding of Christians into two viewpoints. And the people who hold the other viewpoint, they're just as much a Christian as we are, or as I am. And so that we disagree in interpretation, but there's two viewpoints. So what are they? In terms of the end times, one viewpoint is called preterism. Anybody remember what preterism was? The root word here is the word past. So preterism means that the events that are described in the Olivet Discourse were fulfilled in the past. Whose past? The past up to AD 70. Okay, so you take, Jesus was on the Mount of Olives in 33. He didn't die yet for another week or so, but in 33, Jesus is talking into the future, which is now past. AD 70. She's talking about essentially a 37-year period between his death and, of course, the fall of Jerusalem. Preterism says that everything was fulfilled in the past. But that's not quite true. Because one thing has not been fulfilled. Anybody?
The third temple.
The second coming, exactly. Okay? So to accommodate that, it's modified. Partial preterism, which means everything leading up to that has been fulfilled. So what are we waiting for next? We're waiting for him to come. That's what preterism means. So there's no more things to be fulfilled. And not only does he come, but he comes, what? Like a thief in the night. A blink of the eye. Bingo. There he is. There he is. So, okay. Preterism modified with partial preterism. Futurism. That is in opposition to preterism. If preterism is past, futurism is future. Okay? This says that everything in the Olivet Discourse is yet to happen. Still to happen. It's coming. When? Well, a number of things have to take place for futurism to work. But most churches, and they're, like I said, these are saved evangelical churches, believe in futurism. That means we're waiting for another temple. We're waiting for the tribulation. We're waiting for the millennium and things like that. All right.
Does that include the Antichrist?
Yeah, they will put him there too. All of that goes into the future. They take all of the events and stick it into the future. Yes.
Well, how does the preterism deal with the fact that the temple hasn't been rebuilt?
It's not going to be rebuilt. The reason is, okay, why will the temple not be rebuilt? Because we're the temple. See, we violate a core theological position. The temple would be taking us back to a system that was pre-Jesus. Everything that took place in the temple was pointing to Jesus. Once Jesus became the ultimate sacrifice, there's no more sacrificial system. So we're not looking to a third temple. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Driving over here this morning, I was talking with my wife, my dear Sylvia, about St. Augustine. Now, do you do that often? You talk about, St. Augustine as you drive. Honey, I've been thinking about St. Augustine. Okay.
Pray for me.
I've been thinking about St. Augustine. St. Augustine wrote a very powerful book, and with the exception of Paul, between Paul and, say, Martin Luther, in that period of time, St. Augustine is the foremost theologian. I would put him above maybe Aquinas. Well, St. Augustine wrote the book, and you see it right there. It's called The City of God. Now, what's that all about? When he wrote that book, this happened immediately after the sacking of Rome. Rome as an empire was gone at 476, but this happened at 410. And the capital was no longer in Rome anyway. They had moved it to Ravenna, which is up by the Adriatic Sea. But anyway, he writes this book in defense of the church because everybody was blaming the fall of Rome on the Christians. Why not? Okay? And St. Augustine says, no. It's not our fault. It's you guys' fault. You guys being the other city. So he says there's two cities. There's a city of God, hence the name of the book, and there's a city of man. And he says you either love God, you're in the city of God, or you spurn God and you're in the city of man. Now, as we were driving then, I was thinking in terms of the news and all and what we're seeing happening, I said, this is the city of man arising in opposition to the city of God. The city of God will always be a minority. Always a minority. The city of man will be in the majority. Okay? The majority of thinking, a majority of beliefs, majority of people would be in the city of man. Anyway.
Quick question.
Yes.
When you said that they were blaming the church.
Yeah.
Was that the Catholic Church?
There was only, that was the only church at the time.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. And, the Catholic Church, because it wasn't until the Reformation that we had anything but the Catholic Church. Although there was the Eastern Orthodox at the time as well. But they were blaming the Catholic Church. And, but because of our history, St. Augustine belongs to us. As Presbyterians, he's still our guy. Because we hadn't split off yet. So, we want to keep that thought that he represents the Catholic thinking. Well, what's interesting about the fall of Rome, and I told you this, what was the one interesting thing about how they sacked it? What did the barbarians not do? Remember?
Well, I shouldn't tell you that. You told me in the car. That's what I'm gonna say.
They left all of the Christian relics alone.
Yes.
Everything-
All right. The barbarians left the Christians alone. And why did they do that? Because they were Christians. See, the barbarians also were Christians. And the faith had spread then into the hinterland way up there, and they were Christians as well. So that they left the church buildings alone. That didn't stop them from stealing all the gold that they could, but they left the church alone. Interesting factoid, okay? The barbarians left the Christians alone. All right. So let me go back to the attacks we have, the attacks on our faith. What does non-existence produce, okay? Non-existence. We've tried to, this goes back a couple weeks ago, tried to get a concept of being non-existent. What does that produce? And it helps if we could do it in Latin. Anybody want to give me the answer in Latin? Okay. Well, here's the answer. And you need to remember this. Ex nihilo nil fit. Out of nothing, nothing is made. Or, a better way of thinking of it, out of non-existence, nothing comes. Well, then, so why am I telling you about this? Because in the attack on the faith, they said it all came about by accident. But how does non-existence produce existence? Okay? All right. This is the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. I did spend a lot of time thinking about that. Rene Descartes. Remember him from way back when? Okay. Rene Descartes had a famous proof of God's existence. Famous proof. And anybody know what that is? This is very famous. Very famous. Yeah.
Is this the I think, therefore I am?
Exactly. He said, cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Pretty clever. Because if he wasn't, he couldn't think. Therefore he is. And it goes on, et ergo deus est. Okay, so if he is, see, so Descartes says, well, I just proved that I am. Now, because I am, this proves that God is. Because I'm not God. Okay? And this is him. Okay. Question is, the second after we die, okay, the next second, where do we go? And do we all go to the same place? Okay, this is critical because we really want to know where we're going. We know we know how to get there. Where do we go in the next second? Well, answer is into the arms of Jesus. Okay? There's two thoughts on this. First one is soul sleep, which is okay, sleep until the second coming. But the other view, this continuing consciousness, is that we stay conscious, that we are aware of each other, aware of God. It's like Lazarus, you know, in the rich man and Lazarus. Where you have awareness. Now, soul sleep, continuing consciousness. So here's the deal. The second after we die, we're still conscious. Probably more conscious than we've ever been. And therefore, we are aware of what's going to happen. However, we don't all go to the same place. Right? Some go to a good place. Others, the majority, go to a not so good place in preparation of the ultimate not so good place. You notice that it's always in twos. City of man, city of God, good place, bad place. I like this painting. This is a painting, and I had it as one of my e-blasts, if you happen to see it. And it is, well, we're going to assume it's an angel. Angels don't have wings. They are mighty spirits. But the artist had to draw this as a young woman with wings. Otherwise, we wouldn't know it's an angel, unless there was a sign that said this is an angel. But it's symbolic. And notice what she's doing. I assume it's a she. Okay. Notice what's happening. This guy's dead. You can tell he's dead. He looks very dead. And he's wearing a cross, so he's a believer. And she gathers up in her hands his soul. And what's she going to do with that? She'll take it to God. Okay? Now, that's because he, being a believer, goes to that ultimate, that temporary good place. All right. This is, we don't have much to go on from back this time. This is like 167 BC. This is Antiochus Epiphanes IV. He is going to be the one that the prophet Daniel will attribute the abomination of desolation. Okay. And I don't know why I chose that art, but it came up. So we have some requirements. If you're going to be the abominator of desolation, you got to fulfill a bunch of requirements. There has to be an army surrounding your city. Now that was true for Antiochus. You have to have you have to profane the temple in various ways. And this guy did it big time. What did he offer up as a burnt offering? A pig. A pig. Bad. Because you don't do that, right? The whole thing is keep kosher and keep pure, and he offers a pig, which is the ultimate insult, okay? So you do profane things, unholy sacrifice, and they stand in the temple. In the temple proper, they're actually right there. So other people could have done other things. Other armies can surround the city, but they didn't do the rest. They have to do all three things. Now, the question is, was this... Now, and Jesus says about the abomination of desolation, he says, let the reader understand Daniel. Okay, he refers back to Daniel. And then he says, when you see this happening, what are the people, the baby Christians, the new church, what are they supposed to do? Yes. You see, because remember we said it started in 66. The temple was still open in 66. Most people would say, you know what? Here comes Rome. I'm going to go to the safest place I know, which is the temple complex. And Jesus says, don't do that. Do not go there. Go someplace, go into the mountains. They go into a place called Pella. And furthermore, if you happen to be in the city, what are you supposed to do? Get out. And you don't have much time to do it. Not much time at all. Maybe a day. Maybe that's it. So the abomination, in my opinion, okay, therefore it's right, happens in the historical past. And it's not future yet. In other words, not future to next year. Okay? It's back then. And there's several reasons for that. Because it's associated with the escape of the infant church. And what would have happened if the infant church did not escape? There'd be no more infant church, and there'd be no more, most likely, the Christian experience would be killed in the bud, would be destroyed right then and there. In order for Christianity to have a start, okay? Have you ever heard of this guy? Occam. Anybody hear of Occam's razor?
Familiar.
It's not Gillette. This is Occam. Occam's razor, very famous. Okay, it's around the 1300s. And anyway, Occam said that, in essence, if you got two conflicting views, the simpler answer is the better one. Okay? So, no more things should be presumed to exist than are absolutely necessary. That is, the fewer assumptions an explanation of a phenomenon depends on, the better the explanation. So keep it simple. Occam's razor. So now we have two views, historical past or future. Which one gives a simpler explanation? That's why I vote for the preterist, the historical past. Back then, we needed some candidates to be the abominator. And, okay, a lot of people say, well, it was Caligula. But the time frame's wrong on Caligula. We talked about this. You see, because he tried to put his statue in the temple in 41. Well, it's too soon. Because 41, he didn't have an army surrounding the place yet. Titus, or his legionnaires, this doesn't work because verse 15 says he's standing in the holy place. But by the time Titus gets around, the holy place is destroyed. It is, okay, it's toast, kind of literally. So Titus and his legionnaires don't really work. And Josephus says nothing about this, because if he did, if that really happened, Josephus most certainly would have mentioned it, and he doesn't. The Romans were making war, not sacrifices. Now we have the third candidate. And I've been reading about these people for a while now, and they are the Zealots. And they don't sound that bad, but think about Hamas. The Zealots were the equivalent of Hamas in the city of Jerusalem, robbing the temple, robbing people, stealing food. Remember, they're under siege, committing murders upon murders, and these people were headquartered in the very temple itself. So they were setting up a system of desecration. Anyway, not only that, but the Zealots sieged the temple from 68 to 69. That's why I kind of pointed it out. The Zealots held the temple and used it as their base of operations and quartered there. You know, it's not so much that they were in Jerusalem. They were in the holy place. So my vote is for the Zealots. And anyway, Jerusalem remained in the hand of the Zealots until the siege of Jerusalem ended in AD 70. According to Josephus, during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, Christian current era, by Titus, 20,000 Eumedians, today part of Jordan, under the leadership of John, Simon, Phineas, and Jacob, joined the Zealots as they besieged the temple. So the Zealots were actually acting against the Jewish people. Well, okay.
But you said they were Jewish.
Yeah, in nationality, but not in their faith. They were of Jewish descent, but they were acting contrary to the Jewish religion. Okay, so the question about will the abomination be next year? Well, if that's the case, if he has to stand in the temple, we don't have a temple. And the question is, will there be a third temple? And in my estimation, no, there cannot be. We cannot return to a sacrificial system when we have Jesus himself. You follow? Jesus himself is Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God. It's his blood that was shed, and therefore there's no more sacrifices to be made. So if you go back to a temple, they're saying, well, Jesus, forget about what you did. We're going to get ourselves some lambs. We're going to do it all over again. That's so to posit a third temple because you need to have a place for the abomination to stand. That violates Occam and his razor. And Ephesians says that we are members of God's household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, a holy temple in the Lord. See, he's using the analogy of a building. He says, you guys, us guys, we are the temple, a spiritual temple. So forget about that. The old temple, the old covenant, new covenant. Old covenant, you take a lamb or a goat, and you put your hand on it, and you transfer your guilt to the lamb or the goat. And that's imputing the sin. You kind of pass it on. That's the old covenant. The new covenant is this. Okay? God made him to be sin for us that we might be the righteousness of God in him. He took my sin, I received his right. This is the new covenant in cartoon form. Okay? I think that's a good representation. So it's either that or it's this. And therefore, it's that. All right, now let's get down to work. Matthew 24:34. And if you've been following with my friend here, okay. It says there, as a quote, "This generation will by no means pass away till all things are fulfilled." And it's used over and over again. This generation will not pass away. So how does that work? How does it work that this generation will not pass? He's talking to his apostles in 33. A generation is believed to be approximately 40 years. So he said, okay, within the next 40 years, and that takes you to 70, actually 73, but it takes you to 70. Within the next 40 years, this generation will not pass away. So, and by pass away, we mean die. Okay? So how does that work? Well, there's several interpretations for that. It's not an easy passage, not an easy one. It could mean, number one, I'll give you 7 possibilities. Number one possibility, this generation refers to Jesus' contemporaries who would witness all these things as outlined in verses 4 to 31, including Jesus' second coming. Well, you got a problem there. He didn't come. So, if he didn't come, therefore, all those things could be in the preterist, remember, but this is partial preterism. We didn't have that fulfilled. Number 2, as a choice, it's highlighted in green. This generation refers to Jesus' contemporaries who would witness all these things as outlined in verses 4 to 22, 4 to 28, pointing to the destruction of the temple in 70 and everything leading up to it. Just going up to it, but not past it. Jesus' second coming is thus excluded from all these things. This one can work. Number 3. This generation points to the Jews, or the Judeans, implying that they would last as a race until the parousia, which is another way of saying second coming. So the question is, are we talking about people who are alive, contemporaries, or are we talking about a race? Okay. And number 3 is possible, because the way the word is used, Generation has many meanings, but the way it could work is that this generation will not pass away until the second coming. Now, has that race passed away? Not yet. And they've been trying. And I was talking, again, about Esther. Remember Esther? Okay. They tried to kill the Jews, and she turned the tide on them. And then there was another time the Maccabees, they fought off an attempt to kill off all the Jews. And why do we why do the Jews celebrate Hanukkah? What's Hanukkah about? Hanukkah is about the preservation of the oil, miraculous preservation of oil during the Maccabean revolt. So the lamps stayed lit, and that's why the Jewish people have a menorah. They light the light in remembrance of the Maccabees. Anyway, the Maccabees tried to, the Maccabees were the Jews, but again, the race was threatened with extermination. And then, of course, you got 70. That was bad, And then you have, throughout history, you look down, I don't know if you spend much time in history, but the European history of the Jews, really bad. Ferdinand and Isabella, we know them, right? They're all about Chris Columbus. They're also about the persecution of the Jews in Spain. So we had all that. And then you go into Poland, and you go into Russia, and all these places where the Jews have been persecuted. Huh? And now we're seeing it, in my estimation, again. And I don't mean to be radical, but I will. It's a very dangerous time we live in. And what's interesting is the second coming and all that really doesn't have anything to do with America. It's all about Israel. Yeah, okay. The focus, although we would like to think it's about us, it's about Israel. Okay. And I was listening to Mark Levin the other day, which right away identifies my political persuasion, I guess. And that's okay, you still love me. But Mark Levin was saying, when they will, if they find themselves surrounded by an enemy that wants to kill them on all sides, they're not going to go down to death with their nukes gathering dust. Okay? If you got nuclear weapons and everybody wants to kill you, you'll use them. Now, okay, I don't mean to. So what does that do? That's not good. That's why I said these are dangerous times. I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying be aware of that. Be aware. Any thoughts on that matter? The times that we live in, Before this course started, as I said, I didn't give it much thought at all. But now I'm seeing things just a little bit differently.
I think we were talking about how it just seems like hell is bent on exterminating the Jews.
Ah, yes.
And I often wonder, the Jews have yet to accept their Messiah.
Yes.
However, God has a covenant with them.
Yes. Very good.
So that was the one revelation that came to me as we were thinking about all these things. It's like, why haven't they been destroyed? I mean, so much has been done to this community, this race, this culture, this faith, and I if I were God, I'd be frustrated. I think with all this has happened, you still won't come to me.
Yeah.
But He is there for them.
Right.
And I think that's why they survive all these.
Right. They might not be faithful, but God is faithful. See, God has a covenant that He's going to keep. And that's why the Jews have not been wiped out, because God has a covenant with them. Now, that's good news for us because we're included in that, okay? Okay, think about that. Well, what are your thoughts about that? Okay? Am I full of beans in worrying about these times? Or,
All the elements are there.
yeah.
It just takes one or two crazy people to push the button. And that's all it's gonna take now. You know, in earlier times before nuclear war was a possibility, it took a lot of people to kill a lot of people. Now it takes two people, because once one button is pushed, the other button will be pushed. And I mean, we got a very crazy person in Russia that he's willing to push the button to save his ego.
Yes.
And his ego has been damaged, if you believe what we see in the news. And then this other thing, you add that. I believe that all that has to happen is one nuclear device.
And it becomes a chain reaction.
Absolutely.
You say,
Yeah.
one, you don't just shoot off one.
Yeah.
It's a chain reaction. They don't say, oh, okay, we'll take that one. No. And then becomes global.
I have a question about, and forgive my ignorance because
That's all right.
I've studied this, but you know, my wife and I did a DNA test, and my wife has a small percentage of Jewish DNA. Okay, I have not seen in mine or anybody else's that I've talked about any other religion referred to in a DNA test. Are the Jews the only one that is considered a
Well, they're a nationality, see, and because they, as a nation, what you're picking up, and I have it too, by the way, in my DNA profile, is the identity of the Jews has been so kept together. See, Jews marry Jews, and so forth. They're, you know, for the most part, their daughters and sons marry within the faith, their faith. And that's probably why we continue to keep that DNA set. You know, I take that those tests with a grain of salt, I suppose, although I think they have some validity, you know. And I was surprised with in my background, and I have a French name, okay. And yeah, there's French too, but there's a lot of English. But then you look at history and say, yeah, we did a lot of that intermarriage stuff too, you know. But to go back to your point, the Jews as a nationality, yeah. And, well, anyway. So this generation has the interpretation of being the people of that time, or it could be a generational thing. In other words, children of Abraham as a generation. Generation of vipers, okay? Remember Jesus said that. You guys are a generation of vipers. Matthew 5:9, sons of God, sons of the kingdom, or sons of the evil one, sons of the bridegroom, sons of those who murdered the prophets. See, what's happening in that language is the word generation is now more inclusive. Not just the people who are around us right now, but it includes the others, okay? Same thing with the parable of the weeds, the tares, you know. Talking about the generational concept that is more than just contemporaries. In addition, we can compare it to Genesis. And here we have the idea of a generation. The seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Okay? Generational thing. Pharisees and Sadducees who opposed John the Baptist can be seen as representative of the serpent's seed. John disputes their claim to be Abraham's children by pointing out that it's not physical descent, but the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And I like to say, it's not blood in your veins, but faith in your heart that makes you a child of Abraham. Okay? It goes on in number 5 here. Evil and adulterous generation seeks a sign, and the men of Nineveh, see, that's the part, will rise up in judgment against this generation. Okay, so if we think of generation as one of two ways, either contemporaries or a sort of race ethnic. Let me drop down quickly for the sake of time to Romans 11. Romans 11. And this one here probably does require a little bit of reading, and because I think it's so germane. Romans 11:11. And it reads, okay, again I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? And they're talking about Jews here. Did they stumble? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their fullness bring? I am talking to you Gentiles, Paul says. Inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I make much of my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? If the part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so the branches. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not boast over those branches. If you do, consider this. You do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will then say, branches were broken off so I could be grafted in. Granted, but they were broken off because of unbelief, and you stand by faith. Do not be arrogant, but be afraid. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Okay, and it actually continues down. And I don't want to belabor this too much, but then he says, if they do not persist in unbelief, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. After all, if you were cut out of the olive tree that is wild by nature, and contrary to nature were grafted into a cultivated olive tree, how much more readily will these, the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? And so forth. So that is a very interesting way of thinking about this. Paul says that for our sake, there is a time of disbelief, but that we, a wild olive branch, okay, have been grafted in so that the sap, the life of the plant, and will flow into us. Israel is linked to the olive tree in many parts of the Old Testament. The Goyim, that's us, are the wild shoot. Okay, what do they do with it? Okay. Yeshua HaMashiach. I like saying that. You got to get a good emphasis on the end there. Yeshua HaMashiach is Jesus the Messiah. That's how it translates. They have kept their identity for over 2,000 years, the Jews, that is. And a day, I believe, is coming when they will soften their hearts and they will come back and be grafted back in. And Paul's saying how much easier it will be for them to be grafted back in because they're part of it anyway. Capiche? All right. The reason why this is happening is because of the holy covenant that God has established with the Jews. And his covenant will not be broken. Even if we as people are unfaithful, he is faithful. He is faithful. All right, move ahead here a little bit. Ion is not the same as cosmos. And what's ion? It means age. And cosmos is cosmos. When we speak about the end of the age, the question is, are we talking about destruction of the world or the end of a system? And it comes to us here in Matthew 3. And this is the end of it, last call. And what's interesting here, and I've been having a little fun time lately developing my Greek. At first, you say, well, it's Greek to me. Yeah, it is. But gradually it makes some sense. And gradually you can begin to read it. And here, the last word, ainos. It means lifespan, epoch. Could be age of reason, age of enlightenment, the industrial age. So he says, the coming and the consummation of the age. Consummation of the age. What age? The Jewish age, the age of sacrifice and all the rest. Okay. And that, I skipped a few slides, but that's okay. Now is a time for questions that I probably cannot answer. Because there are more things here than I really do understand. I just understand the basics, past, future. I believe that these events happened pre-70 AD, with the exception of the coming of the Lord in the second coming. And the second coming is just that. It's coming. See? It's still coming. So it's not like it's not going to come. The second coming will come. We don't know the day or the hour. Jesus says only the Father knows. But that doesn't mean it's not coming. All right. I will now shut up. Rejoice, rejoice.
Praise be to God.
Yeah. Hallelujah. Anything you want to talk about?
Okay.
Am I full of beans with some of the stuff?
Can we go back to that slide when you were doing the review? You had a slide.
Okay,
there that-
tell me when to stop.
Well,
It's near the beginning.
near the beginning, the slide about where do we go when we die?
Oh, okay. I know what you were talking about. Yeah. That's ways back.
You had made a comment earlier in the class.
Okay, this is it. Where do we go?
No, it's one more.
Okay.
Yeah. The next second after death.
Where do we go?
Okay. You had made a comment that nobody knows of anybody who's come back from death to tell us.
Well, Jesus did.
Jesus, except for Jesus. And we have the example of Jesus.
Right.
So, where are you coming up with that statement?
Okay,
Or
from the following place. Remember, the word Lazarus, the name Lazarus, is used in two places. There's Lazarus who was Jesus' friend, okay? And then there was Lazarus who was in the parable. And so Jesus told this parable about the rich man and Lazarus. And in that parable, Lazarus was poor and he was just mistreated and everything, okay? Whereas the rich man had everything in life. So in the parable, the rich man says, Abraham, talking to Abraham, Abraham's bosom. So the idea is that, and that means contemporary, it's ongoing existence. So the rich man says, Abraham, Father Abraham, ask brother Lazarus to dip his finger into a little bit of water and come here and put it on my tongue that I might be relieved. And the parable goes on. Abraham says, my son, while you were alive, you had the Moses and the prophets, and yet you didn't change. Whereas Lazarus was living like a dog, and we assume faithful to God. And then he says, well, there's two reasons why this can't happen. First of all, there's this enormous gulf that separates you and him, okay, big gulf. And the second reason is you had your chance. Okay, take it for what it's worth. But that's where I get that one statement from. Okay? Probably others, you look at the Transfiguration. These people are conscious. In other words, you have Moses and Elijah and one other guy. And they are not soul sleeping. They are present. Okay? And then I look at various places where we're surrounded by, remember here in, I think it's Hebrews, we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. And the writer, I think that was Hebrews, was drawing a reference to a sporting event of that time. So that the people in the stands were cheering on the people who were playing. Okay? So it says, don't you know we're surrounded by a cloud of witnesses? Okay, so that's where I'm getting it from. I'm inferring it from there, as opposed to a direct, you know.
I guess you could also say the Lazarus who was the friend of Jesus.
Well, Lazarus, the friend of Jesus.
Came right out of-
There must be another meeting or something.
There's a woman.
Oh, the woman.
Back out of the airport.
Imagine they chose to go to that.
Don't they realize that we have important things to discuss? They can't do it. See you later.
Okay.
Guess who I got? The pictures that I had.
So,
Sure.
all right.